Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Sentinelle. It's based on a character named Klara, who's performed by Olga Kurylenko, and we see her in the opening of the movie undergoing an interrogation of sorts as she's trying to extract information from this random civilian out in the operation that they're doing in the Middle East. She ends up finding out the information that she needs in order to conduct the rest of her mission, but it ends up being too late as a terrorist attack ends up happening, and she's traumatized by the incident as a result. It fast forwards into the future sometime after this, and we see Klara has been transferred from her old unit to her new unit, which happens to be located in her home in Paris. And on one hand, she is happy to be back in Paris because she gets to spend more time with her family and she's closer to them, but on the other hand, her new posting at her place in Paris is not really all that interesting. She mostly just does reconnaissance duties, and that's pretty much it. To celebrate Klara coming home alive from her tour in the Middle East, she and her sister go to a nightclub to celebrate the occasion and just basically to kick back and relax and have a good time. During their time at the nightclub together, Klara's sister gets mixed up with some Russian guys who happen to be at the same nightclub as they are, and that kind of signals off warning bells in Klara's head, but Klara's sister assures her that she's fine and she's welcome to do whatever she wants for the rest of the night. She ends up going home with one of the Russian guys, and Klara ends up going home with a random girl that she meets at the nightclub. And this is where most of the events of this movie center around. Her sister doesn't end up coming home from the nightclub that night or wherever it was that she ended up going. Klara gets nervous and then ends up finding out later that day while she's in the middle of her recon duty that her sister is in the hospital in a stage 3 coma. And Klara decides to take matters in her own hands despite the fact that she's employed by the French military as she tries to investigate what happened to her sister and finds out who's responsible for her near death. I found the whole inciting incident of this movie, Klara's sister being knocked out and raped and being put into a coma and all that, I found that it happened too late in the movie. It feels like it happens like about half an hour or so after the movie initially starts. Being that this is an action thriller movie and there's a lot of suspense and different action scenes involved, I kind of went into this movie figuring that it would get right into the thick of things without delaying so much in terms of character development, and that wasn't the case in this movie. I guess what I'm saying in this regard is that I would have preferred a little less talk and a lot more action. That being said, I don't think this movie would quite have worked as well if Olga Kurylenko wasn't in the role of Klara in this movie. Olga adds a ton of personality and depth to Klara's character. Not only is Klara suffering from PTSD that she got from her time in the military overseas in the Middle East, but she's also suffering from an opioid addiction that she uses as an excuse to basically address her medical concerns associated with her PTSD. That ends up being a double-edged sword, of course, because while the medication does help her to a certain extent in helping focus on her job, she ultimately ends up running out of that medication and she's required to see a therapist before she can continue her prescription, which leads her to going to random drug dealers on the street trying to help keep the habit going. Olga did a tremendous job playing a soldier who is both an addict and a victim of trauma at the same time. They show all kinds of scenes in the movie where Klara is going through withdrawal, she's having shudders and she's trembling from wherever she's sitting down, she ends up taking pills whenever she's on the job, so you know just from that she's got all sorts of medical problems going on. And at the same time, the movie flashes back to different scenes of where Klara was doing tours, and it goes through all of these traumatizing things that happened to her whenever she was doing her tours. And then there are times when Klara ends up pointing her guns at people that are completely innocent civilians, but she ends up losing herself in whatever memory she's caught up in, and it's up to other members of her unit to kind of snap her out of it and get her back to reality. If that angle hadn't been put in place in this movie, if there wasn't any sort of character flaws like the opioid addiction and the PTSD, and the movie didn't really go into much depth with that, then it would have been pretty much your bog standard average action film. But it's thanks to these little details as well as Olga Kurylenko's tremendous performance that this movie's status is able to elevate above that average action stigma. The action scenes in this movie also stood out in that regard. They're not really explosion-y or bombastic in any kind of way, save for the war scenes that happened in the initial opening, but I still thought that they were very entertaining and extremely thrilling. The action scenes are mostly centered around close quarters combat, where Klara is stuck stuck in a tight corridor or room and she has to battle 2 or 3 other guys in the same room. Pretty simplistic in approach, but it was just great to see Clara use all kinds of objects to just inflict all kinds of pain on her enemies. Again, not much in the way of special effects, but there's nothing that beats seeing a random guy getting their head bashed into a bathroom sink. The firefights aren't really at a John Wick kind of level, so if you're going into this movie thinking that, then you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. For me, I didn't really mind it that much, however. I personally prefer when action movies are a bit more on the realistic side as opposed to reaching cartoon levels of violence and explosions. And it does help that because this movie is on Netflix, you get the benefit of not really having to worry about the PG-13 rating. There's all kinds of blood and gore that happens in this movie. It's not really anything egregious, but it is realistic enough that you don't feel like cringing whenever someone ends up getting shot by a gun and you don't see any blood in a typical theatrical release. They do not shy away from the violence in this movie. You see people who are missing eyeballs after they're shot in the face, someone gets stabbed right through the bottom of their jaw and you see the knife entering their roof. There were quite a few times in this movie where I was like, ugh. And I just realized that may go against what I just said about the violence being egregious. It does go a little bit beyond, but it's never really anything that, again, is cartoony or completely unrealistic. Despite my enjoyment of the action scenes and the level of depth that Olga added to her character of Clara, I found that the movie was very short. If you take away the 5 minutes that's dedicated to the end credits of this movie, the runtime only adds up to like 75 minutes. And because this movie is not only just an action movie, but also a drama that covers really heavy, dark themes like drug addiction and PTSD, you would think that there would be more time dedicated to exploring these topics in the movie, but apparently that wasn't the case for this film. I think if the movie was 10 or 15 minutes longer and it spent more time getting into the action scenes as well as exploring Clara and her family background, if we just got more time out of this movie to take everything in, then I think this movie would have been much better compared to your average action movie that happens to be released on Netflix. But the fact that Olga does such an amazing job with the character with the limited amount of time that she has on screen speaks volumes about the quality of this film to begin with. But at times, it feels like the movie is rushing through things too quickly and doesn't dedicate enough time to talk about certain things as it should. There are many times, like I said, where Clara is taking opioids when she shouldn't be at work, and it's never really addressed by her fellow military personnel. No one ever really talks to her to tell her to quit it. There's like one scene where it does happen and it kind of just gets hand waved off. And I definitely feel that some extra time in the movie should have been made to dedicate that time between her developing tensions with her military and how she ultimately ends up going against them, trying to figure out what happened to her sister. Outside from a few things here or there though, Sentinelle is a very good action movie. This movie reminded me a lot of the Liam Neeson action movie Taken. Just the fact that it takes place in Paris and also the fact that something happens to a relative of the main character. It reminded me a lot of that movie. And I know I keep saying it over and over again in this review, but Olga really does help the movie stand out from just being your average military action movie. If you're looking for a fun action thriller hybrid movie and you really want to see a strong central main character taking command of the story, then this movie is definitely right up your alley. I really enjoyed my time watching Sentinelle. Although I felt it could have been a bit longer and could have spent a bit more time toward the action and developing Clara's personality a little bit more, I think that every minute that was in this film did go to good use. Anyways guys, that's going to be my review of Sentinelle. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Colombian crime comedy, Dog Washers. Bye bye!